SpaceX is going to be joining Nasdaq 100. I guess that'll start happening after the 4th of July. After July 6th, I guess July 7th.
Yes, probably
That's
before
Tuesday.
before the market opens, July 7th, they'll be included in the Nasdaq 100. It's 15 trading days after the IPO, which started June 12th. So if you factor in the 4th of July holiday, which falls on July 3rd this year because it's a Friday, that'll put SpaceX into the Nasdaq 100 on morning of July 7th.
So, Aman, do you think this is going to solve SpaceX's problem? I guess the stock has been slumping a little bit after the IPO. It kind of mooned up there initially, but it has now kind of traded down to maybe only 150 a share, sort of hovering around the $2 trillion valuation. Only
Oh,
$2
you're
trillion.
such a negative Nancy.
I
Like
know, right? So
two years
terrible.
ago, 2 years ago, this company was 210 billion valuation, and everyone thought that was overvalued. Then it was 400 billion, and that was overvalued. And then it was 800 billion, and then we went to a trillion, and now it's 2 trillion. And sure, the price went up to, the price, remember, at 135 at their IPO. Very limited price discovery, by the way. Ticked at 150 bucks a share. I think briefly went above 200 for maybe 1 hour of one day, and are holding it at 150. So the mini slump over the past couple of days is, in context, it's I wouldn't call this a problem. Now there will be demand coming in from beginning on July 7 from a couple of funds that are tied to the Nasdaq 100. So the forced buyers, the inelastic buyers, will be primarily these ETFs. The two biggest ones are QQQ, which is run by Invesco, and then kind of a baby brother to QQQ. So that'll probably bring in a fair amount of demand, and whether that's priced in or whether they'll have an effect on the stock price, I don't know. It's probably going to generate some demand over the course of that week. First week of July should be pretty good for the stock, I would think.
Do you think that's really going to be enough to offset the selling that's likely to happen, though? I mean, I guess one thing that's I read was the amount of representation in that index is not based on the size of the market cap. It's based on the size of the float. And because SpaceX only has a relatively small percentage of float, there's not that much buying. I think estimates were somewhere between $5 to $10 billion worth of buying that might happen from index purchases. But, we're going to see 20% of the stock market value unlock for trading, or unlock out of lockup, I guess.
Yeah,
Which
after
could
earnings.
be tens, if not 20, 30, $50 billion worth of sales, perhaps, right?
It won't be that much. Let's go through the rules that you correctly described. It's float adjusted. So let's take an example of, so let's say Tesla's at 1.5 trillion and SpaceX is 1.5 trillion in market cap. But Tesla is floating about 80% of its stock, meaning it's publicly available to trade. In the case of Tesla, you've got, 1.2 trillion of stock that's available to trade. In the case of SpaceX, you only have, as of yesterday, about 86 billion ready to trade. So the
Maybe only like
composition,
3, 4, 5%, right?
yeah, they exercise the green shoe, which is what the bankers do to take the float up a little if the market's doing well. They did that last week. The amount of float relative to market cap's around 6%. But Tesla's at
Okay.
80%. So that means in the Nasdaq 100, Tesla will be represented 10 times more than SpaceX, even though they have the same market cap. So you are right that there's not going to be the amount of buying is just going to be gated by the float. There is probably going to be, let's say, 10 billion of potential forced buying from these index funds into an $86 billion float. So it is significant, but there's a lot of volatility and volume we're seeing in SpaceX every week. They're trading probably 60 to 70 billion of volume every week. So 10 billion going
Right.
in, and with the context of 67 billion is it's a factor. It's not going to be enough, I think, to push the price higher. The partial lockup begins in August after earnings. Once they get their earnings done, it's a 20% release for certain investors. But remember,
Right.
Elon, who owns 40% of the company, is locked up for a year. Gwen Shotwell and Antonio Gracias, who together own 7 to 8%, they're locked up for a year. And just because people are locked up and ready to sell doesn't mean that they will. Like a lot of these SpaceX people on the cap table have
When
had a chance to sell in previous tender offers. They haven't. In fact, they've been buying into the IPO. Not a lot of employees
right.
are buying into the IPO, not selling. So it's
When
hard to
when do
tell.
employees get the chance to sell?
They are mostly locked up for the first 180 days, and some of the key senior ones are locked up for longer than that. So we will see employees selling. Probably not until the end of the year, if at all.
Probably, I guess, the next 2 or 3 months, it's mostly just inside investors that might be selling, right?
Yeah, it's the Founders Fund, it's Fidelity, and a handful of the other larger investors. But
Right.
I think what we'll see is a lot of continued volatility. This is one factor on the buy side. There'll be some selling on the lockup release. This stock's going to bounce around by 10, 20, 30%. Tesla did the same thing. A lot of these IPOs will bounce around for those first 3 months by 20%, up or down. So it's all going to get lost in the wash, I think. And the company just has to deliver on their earnings and perform through the end of the year. And then I think we'll know what's what.
One minor sad story here. Elon was a trillionaire for a couple of weeks, but
Oh, no. Is he off the
unfortunately,
list?
he is now no longer a trillionaire. If any of you have watched Silicon Valley, the comedy series with Russ Hannemeyer lamenting his being bounced out of the Three Commas Club, Trace Commas Club, Elon is no longer in the Four Comma Club. Oh, woe's me. So sad.
That's unfortunate. I'm sure he's heartbroken.
What is it? Your father's lightsaber. This is the weapon of a Jedi Knight. Not as clumsy or random as a blaster.
Moving on to our next big set of stories. Anthropic is still doing well, like trading at over $1 trillion on the secondary market. However, some challenges with all the Mythos and Fable and whether the government is restricting the release of some of Claude's models to certain companies. Aman, what do you think about all this? Is this going to put any pressure on Anthropic?
It's not great to have your most important model, your most advanced model, Mythos, or I guess it's Fable 5. That's essentially Mythos with safety guardrails. It's not great to have that being staged by the government. I would say the probability of an IPO for Anthropic would have been 90%. And a month ago, it's maybe 70% that will go public this year. So there's been maybe a little bit of a concern. I think this is mostly for them a messaging issue. I think if you remember back to what they did in the spring, they launched what was then Mythos, now Fable 5, and they told everybody that this is going to be so dangerous, so powerful, it could override all the cybersecurity guardrails on the internet. So we're going to do the responsible thing and stage it out to a bunch of partners, which I should give them a lot of credit for. But I think just, that spooked the government. And then Amazon came out as one of the chief partners of Anthropic and said, hey, we're testing Fable 5. We're observing it jump guardrails. And rather than being able to talk through with the regulators, like this is why it's under control, somehow the communications broke down and they didn't get the message across and the government restricted them. I would hope and I would expect that that they got to get really good at comms and government relations before they go public. I don't think they're very good at it right now, but when you start, making those statements and freak regulators out, you have to be able to have those conversations and bring them along. So I don't think it's a Jack Ma moment. I think this is just something they're going to have to kind of work through on their top model. But I still think they're going to be a really successful IPO just based on their financials and momentum.
The U.S. maybe pulled back a little bit on the throttle and is now allowing Mythos to release to some U.S. companies. But
Right.
There were people who were speculating that maybe Anthropic was a victim of its own, fear and doubt, basically that they were trying to do some form of regulatory capture by scaring people into thinking that, hey, we need government oversight of these models. And they got maybe a little too successful with that. The government was like, hey, yes, maybe we should restrict the model. But I think we're seeing now not just the government capture, regulatory capture issue. I think we're also seeing maybe some cost issues come up as, potentially being, a concern. And we'll cover that a little bit later. I think you're right, at least for the moment. We're not really seeing any problems with Anthropic's secondary market value trading any lower. In fact, kind of the opposite. We're seeing it trade up. If we look at sort of where the Anthropic rounds were being priced, that's kind of the blue or gray line here. That's the, more stair step. But then if you look at sort of the actual secondary price that's trading, and that's the purple line, it's trading above $1 trillion now. That hasn't seemed to slow down too much. But where do you think that's going to go? Do you think we're going to see the rampant growth that we've seen over the last year or two? Do you think we might see a little bit of a slowdown in the valuation going forward?
I'm going to make a crazy prediction. I was thinking about this over the weekend, and I actually think this is going to be north of SpaceX, I think. So where's SpaceX? 2 trillion? I think this could be close to 3 trillion when it hits the public market.
Wow.
And I'll tell you why, because they're at 40. Last we knew they're at 47 billion in ARR, growing at 10x a year. But let's pause on the 10x a year because that just boggles the mind.
I have a feeling that'll slow down. I kind of just
right?
wonder that might be, yeah.
But where will they be at the end of the year? They will price, let's say, in Q4, and they would tell you where they're at for the full year 2026, and they'll guide to 27, or they'll have their bankers do it the way that I mean, SpaceX came right out and projected the hell out of their numbers, and it did the one
Right.
thing that you're never supposed to do in an S1, which is to predict the future. I got to think Anthropic will do that too. If they're at 100 billion in ARR by the end of this year, let's say it slows down to 2x, $200 billion at the end of 2027. I would think they're going to be hugely profitable. They're going to be mostly inference then. The gross margins on inference are 85%. It could be a 70% gross margin company. I don't know how you lose money on that kind of profitability. So 200 billion ARR, growing at 2x year over year, profitable. Would that be a 15x? We're seeing CrowdStrike, and we're seeing all kinds of Palo Alto Networks and SaaS companies at 12 to 15x revenues. I think this could be a close to $3 trillion, IPO in the next, let's say, 6 to 9 months.
I don't know if I'm quite as bullish there. I guess I'd like to see how revenue trends over the next 6 months, but I agree with you. Let's assume that revenue is somewhere between 50 to 100 billion by the end of this year.
Right.
And that's, when they're going to go public. Probably they're still profitable. I guess it seems like they're heading that direction. Might be some little funny money in how you count for that, but
Maybe.
I agree with you. I can't see how it's worth less than 2 trillion. Maybe the bar isn't SpaceX. Maybe the bar is just, the comparison against open weight models and maybe a little bit OpenAI. But I think it's certainly going to happen this year. And I think I would probably agree with you. It'll be north of 2 trillion. I don't know if it'll be all the way to 3, but maybe.
I'd price conservatively and not try to max every dollar out of the IPO. I think that's a mistake that Facebook made. You got to go way back to 2012 to remember this. But Facebook tried to take every penny out of the IPO and trade it down in the next 6 months, and they've recovered and done great. But a lot of companies just try to, max the IPO. So I think if they go conservatively and then let it pop and let their day one investors get ahead and get retail participation and get included in the Nasdaq 100, I think they'll do just fine.